Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon online here for Catalyst Meet the VC session. So, I'm Fernice, the community manager for Catalyst. If it's your first time at our Catalyst event, welcome here. Catalyst, we are a co-working space and we are based in Singapore. So, we focuses on housing the health and medtech startups. And most importantly, we are also an ecosystem builder. So what does ecosystem builder really means? What we really want to do is to build relationships. So we want to connect the startups and let them have these real conversations with the community that we have built. Then our community comprises of partners who are clinical professionals, engineers, academic institutions, corporates, as well as investors. So we want them to congregate together, provide solutions that could add vibrancy to our existing healthcare innovation space. So of course, we are very committed to it still, and we are very grateful that we can bring this content, this experience to you online. So thank you for being here with us. So for today's session, we are very honored to have an investor here with us, an investor who has founded three companies himself before embarking on his venture capitalist career. So without further ado, I will now pass the mic now to Remy Chong, who's the principal of elev8.vc. Remy, please.
Thank you, Furnace. Hi, everyone. I will jump on the video for a couple of seconds, but later on you will not see me anymore just to conserve the bandwidth. And thank you so much, Furnace. So that's a very good introduction. I actually failed three companies more than I started three companies. And one of the reasons why I went to the VC space is really because I understand and I've been through how hard the life of a founder is. So that is why venture capital actually is a very big part of what I really want to do. And hopefully I can continue to help a lot of startups. And this is really part of what I like to do, at least as in this webinar that I'm currently doing. And I hope that a lot of you will get very interesting insights out of it. So let me just quickly jump onto my slides, and I will go ahead to turn off my webcam for a moment here. Okay, good. So if anybody is not saying anything or I start breaking off, please do let me know in the chat. But if not, I will just carry on. So a quick introduction. elev8.vc is a VC fund based in Singapore, and the text you see below, scaling world-class B2B future tech companies, is effectively our vision. So in order to achieve this vision, we of course have three mission statements. This is a little bit traditional. We start with vision, mission, but these three things effectively guide a lot of what we do. So we invest in early stages so that our own investors can see superior returns. And that is important because first and foremost, we need to be a sustainable business ourselves in order to continue helping and investing in startups. The second mission that we really have is to invest in great founders who, to us, is probably the most important factor for any early stage investing. And we also invest in disruptive technologies that we think will redefine how businesses get done. So this means that each of our investment actually has a potential to change the world, and as a result, generate the superior returns that we are talking about in point one. This also means that we are investing in what we call future tech, which I will define in about 2 slides time. And then the third one is that we are actually low volume, high conviction, high support. So this means that we are not going to invest in 100 startups across the life of at least this fund. We will invest in quite a relatively low number. But what we really aspire to do is that we will be very hands-on with our portfolio companies, and we aspire to be the first number that they call as and when they run into any issues, if they need advice, they need support, just to bounce off ideas. This psychological safety that we give to founders when they come talk to us. So throughout the presentation, I'll be talking a lot more about each of these points in a lot more detail. So things like what does talented founders mean to us? What are some of the disruptive technologies that interest us? What kind of support we offer to our portfolio startups? And last but not least, of course, if you have any questions, please post them into the Q&A section, and I will try my very best to address them at the end of this webinar. And again, if you like any questions, please do upvote them so that I can see it. And most likely what I'll be doing is I'll be going through a lot of these questions top down. So please upvote the questions you like. Please post the questions that you have. Any fantastic questions that I managed to come across, even if I don't see it being upvoted, I'll of course try to answer them as well. All right. So first and foremost, an overview of elev8.vc. So as mentioned, we are early stage fund. This means that we invest from pre-seed onwards and at check size of 250K USD and above. So that is our sweet spot. The future tech I mentioned, I will define in the next slide. Right, we are a fund that is also very laser focused on 4 key sectors listed here. Really because we find that these are the areas that we can truly support our portfolio companies. And let me go a little bit in depth into each of these 4. So under mobility and autonomous vehicles, how we see ourselves supporting is that we are connected to quite a large number of companies in this area, and I mean enterprises, large companies in this area, both from a household names perspective. So we're talking about the likes of BMW and Continental, that we have very good friends there, as well as names that maybe industry insiders would know better, such as Here Maps. And these people can then be very early customers, whether is it POCs, POVs, or really just the first customer, the first champion. They can be technology partners, which what Here Maps is doing with one of our startups. And they can even be co-investors, which we have also done, bringing a large enterprise in there to really de-risk a lot of the commercial side of things from the point of investment. Now, I will jump into MedTech because that is obviously the theme of today. And in MedTech, we are also similarly connected to folks at places such as Philips, such as Sanofi, which you will see one of our MedTech advisors is from towards the end of the presentation. And we also know quite a number of medical professionals, and these people do help us a lot in the due diligence part of it, as well as the value creation part of it. Just let me take a quick pause here. I'm seeing a number of questions coming up in the chat function. Do post them in the Q&A part so that people can upvote it. Okay, now moving on, let's talk about AI and IoT. So in AI and IoT, we have very good friends at places like PBS, SoftBank Robotics. And these people are really, really useful for me, at least for technical and commercial validation. So any new technology, I'll send it over their way and they'll talk to their tech team. Their tech team will be like, okay, this makes sense, or no, actually this doesn't make sense, or this makes sense, but actually nobody's gonna buy it because nobody really needs, for example, this amount of accuracy, precision, speed, for example. So that's how we do it. AI and IoT and MedTech are also very closely related, especially if you are talking about medical devices. Last but not least, communications technologies. This is a relatively special area because most of the time when we talk about communications technologies, people think about telcos. Now we're connected there, but when we talk about communications technologies in future tech sense, we are really talking about the cutting edge new communications protocols. And as such, the use cases are very varied. We have seen nameless protocols that came out right fresh off research, and they don't use it for so much for transmission of data. They use it more for localization of assets at very, very high pace. So the use case there is probably towards the likes of fully autonomous warehouses. So those use cases are different. And some of the interesting people we know in this space include Facebook, who has a telecoms infrastructure project. All right, moving on to the right side of the deck, just to have you follow. So all these connections are actually very important to us, and they are very intricately linked to the unique approach that we have towards investing and helping our portfolio companies scale. So how we do this, how we do B2B future tech at an early stage, which is traditionally seen as something extremely high risk is effectively we de-risk our investments from both a financial standpoint and a validation standpoint by bringing in some of these large enterprises, sometimes even before we invest. And that effectively says that someone in some large company in the world has already looked at technology and they find that it's interesting. They have looked at the technology and they think that there is money to be made, and they are willing to be the first champions. And as we all know, in a vast majority of the time, the first customer is usually the most difficult to secure customer. So that's our approach towards investing in early stage B2B future tech companies. Of course, at growth stage, and we will also elaborate a little bit more about this later on in the value creation slide, we will also continue our high support in both regional and global expansion, again, through some of the networks and resources that we have globally. Now, currently, this future tech fund is based out of Singapore, and we intend to back about 15 to 20 high conviction, high support companies. This is all hands on deck from the entire team. Last but not least, we are also part of the government partnerships, where both equity investments, so for people who know a little bit better, this is Startup SG Equity, and also Startup SG Talent, which is a little bit less well known, but effectively we are able to help our startups bring in the talent that they need into Singapore, with the help of the government, of course. Okay, moving on. This is one of the most common questions we get. Effectively, what do we want to see in companies that we invest in? Or what are some of the companies that VCs typically like to see and like to invest in? So I will spend a little bit of time here, and let's go in. So first and foremost, for elev8.vc, we like future tech, and this is how we define future tech, which is deep tech, which I will define again, plus some commercial debt. So deep tech for the longest time is something that people say, I know it when I see it. And to a certain extent, this is still pretty much true in today's context. But personally, I like BCG, Boston Consulting Group's definition of deep tech, which essentially says that the solution must be based on hard to reproduce technological or scientific advances. So I like that definition of deep tech because that essentially captures the essence of the defensive moat that is required for technologies for deep technologies, and also the scientific advances part of it. Now, unfortunately, deep tech usually is not the most widely adopted one. A lot of people might have a hard time imagining why the best technologies don't survive. But the analogy I usually give, I know this is a B2C example, but I think everybody can relate, which is McDonald's don't have the best tasting burgers, not even the best looking burgers, but they are the most successful burger chain in the world. So over here, things that we look at include unit economics, ROI for customers, willing to pay, ability to scale, so on and so forth. And a lot of these, as mentioned, are a huge part of the validation are being done by the fact that large enterprises can champion the company at a very early stage. So that's future tech. Next, founders' conviction. I'm pretty sure people hear this all the time, saying founders and talented founders are one of the key, most important part of it. But to be honest, no one can put a finger and say that this particular one trait makes a founder exceedingly talented or exceedingly great, and this particular one trait makes a founder not so great. I have worked with many outstanding founders. Some of them, or rather all of them, have very different traits compared to one another. And I feel that it's a very soft, very human aspect, although it is exceedingly important for early stage company, where the company really has nothing much more than the sum total of the founders. So personally, I use what I call the ABCD model. So first, A, action. I like founders who take action, and they take action fast. And so it's really more action than talking. B is the belief. So founders need to really fully 150% believe in the market that they're serving, the solution that they are providing. And these are things that we effectively have to evaluate in person. C talks about commitment. So we like founders who are fully committed to the cause, whether is it working 26 hours a day, which I personally don't agree with, just for the record. But we like to see commitment. Either that or they have given up some very stable, very interesting jobs that they're currently doing, or they have putting in quite a number of dollars and cents into the company. And that to us is are proxies for commitment. And last but not least, determination. Now, to scale a future tech B2B company is not easy. Working with enterprises are not easy. Half the time, you'll be pulling your hair out. And that is why determination is something that's really important to us. So personally, I use these 4 key things, which I just call it a BCD model. Inflection point. So essentially, this means, in layman terms, with our investment, the company can see exponential growth very quickly. So some typical examples here, if you are looking at medtech, FDA approvals. So if post our investment, you are going to look at FDA approval within, say, 6 months or 3 or 6 months, then this is very interesting for us because typically that's when we see companies start growing. But of course, we also mentioned we want a detailed roadmap about how to get there. So getting the FDA approval is a license. It doesn't mean that you can drive at 100 kilometers per hour. So show us exactly how you intend to reach 100 kilometers per hour. And that is what we are looking for. Other examples include you need fund injections to service a major client that is just waiting to be signed up or has already signed up, but you need money in order to bring in some resources to service the client. You have a cutting-edge product looking for enterprise customer to be the first champion, and we can bring in that first enterprise customer champion. So all those signal to us that you are at an inflection point. Post-investment, within 3 to 6 months, you will grow really quickly. 4th, exit potential. Honestly, I feel that this is self-explanatory, but I think from a startup perspective, I can understand why many startups so-called see this, or rather have this in a blind spot, because it's a very VC-centric measure. So to keep things simple, we need to keep our lights on too, unfortunately. But generally, we see exit potential as a direct consequence of a strong product market fit. Now, I have just 2 important points here when it comes to exit. One is exits are not always listing on a stock exchange. And in fact, in Southeast Asia, we see more M&A, mergers and acquisitions, than listings, exceedingly more. And for future tech B2B, we see M&A as almost the default route for exit, because it is very difficult for the general market to understand deep technologies. And as such, the valuation that you are looking at, if you want to pursue a listing strategy, might not be as strong as M&A strategy. So that's the first point. The second point is that it is not always revenue or profit driven. Now, because exit is the goalpost, the way you get there is really slightly more secondary. So once in a while, and I've personally invested in a couple of those companies, we see companies that already have a short list of target acquirers at the point of investment. Whether is it they already have a discussion about M&A, or they have actually gotten an offer which they say, no, I'm rejecting it at this point in time, but you can make a small investment in your company. When we go bigger, let's talk. And then in this case, the goalpost is very clear. These companies might not even be judged on how their revenue is growing, but more on how their technology is growing, how close they are to that M&A, how close they are to integrating that technology with the potential acquirer. But the key thing to note here, or rather one small point to be careful about, is also not to be overly dependent on one guy. Any exit, the holy grail is always to spark a bidding war between 2 or 3 parties. So that's exit potential. Now, last but not least, and this is something that I sort of push the team to add in, which is when we talk about companies that we want to invest into, I basically told the team, if we cannot value add the startup, let's not invest. Because I feel that in today's market, there are enough strategy investors out there for almost any good startup to find a strategic investor that can really, really help them. So in other words, we don't really want to leave our success to chance as well. That is viewing it from the fund's perspective. And actually, most importantly, this is actually something that's very ingrained into elev8's identity and ingrained into the reason why me and my team do what we do. This is actually our why. We want startups to succeed, and we don't want to pull our punches in making that happen. So I personally find it a little bit frustrating, or sometimes if there is a startup that is going through some difficulties, but unfortunately I'm hands-tied or I just don't have the right connections or resources to help. Thankfully, this has not so far happened within this fund. I'm very sure that it will come. One of those days will come. But at least let us exhaust all that we can do to value add some of these companies that we have. All right, so that easily sums out the key things that we look out for, and I think what most VCs look out for in early stage companies that they invest in. I will talk a little bit into the later stage. So if you are a startup founder looking into Series A, hang on around for 2 more slides and we'll get there. Oh, in fact, it's here, 1 more slide. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about value creation, because I realized that if we look at elev8 as a VC fund from a startup's perspective, this is essentially what makes us different as an early stage B2B future tech investor. So interestingly, when we first started talking about this, when I first brought the team together and we sat down and said, okay, let's do this, we went about putting in place many structures, many systems, many policies to track what we are doing well, what we are not doing well, ask how can we measure these things, very methodological and very logical about it. But it was only until a little bit later, of course, when we started doing some of these things, that we realized that founders started calling us back and started telling us what they really need at that single moment in point. Whether is it to bounce off ideas, for advice on certain topics, no matter how many, and even for some psychological support sometimes. So that's when we realized that actually the single most accurate measure is whether they call you first, or maybe not first, maybe the first 5, when they need support and advice. And that eventually became our lighthouse. It guides us in everything we do when it comes to value creation. Now, that's not to say that structures and systems are not important. We still have those. As you can see here, we look at it very systematically from term sheet to investment to growth to future rounds. But I think we need these to make sure that we cover all grounds, and hopefully nothing falls through the gaps. But our lighthouse is still the line that you see above. I promised to talk a little bit about the Series A side of things. Now, everything at Series A, so just let me go back 1 slide. So here, everything still applies at Series A. And we know this because we are very actively helping quite a number of our companies to raise Series A. And personally, I used to be doing Series A investing. So everything here still applies. The one additional thing that we see tend to be missing from here at Series A is that Series A investors typically want to see a very strongly data-driven, and by data-driven, I mean financial data-driven, metrics data-driven company. And that very often is missing because you get away with that at a seed stage, maybe even pre-A stage, where the idea is more important, the founders are more important. But at Series A stage is a lot more about financial evaluation than ideas, technologies, defensive mode evaluation. So that is the key difference. And that is also why if you are today a seed stage founder or you are planning to raise your Series A, now is the time to go about cleaning up all the accounts, go about cleaning up all the financials, making sure you have your North Star metrics ready, and you have the growth trajectory ready, you have the financial forecast ready. Almost everything will revolve around numbers for later stage. And by later stage, I mean Series A and above. All right, I promise also to talk about future tech that interests us. So these are just some of the examples. I will not go through each and every one of them, but hopefully this gives you some insights into some of the technologies that we have looked at that interested us. And in fact, some of these we already invested in. I will also go through some of the portfolio companies that we have. And I will not go through all of them in detail, but if any of you have any interest in any of them, put it in the Q&A. If a lot of people like it, I'll talk about it. If not, you can reach out to me privately and maybe we can talk a little bit more. But okay, let's go in. Entropica is a quantum computing startup, just about one of the hardest due diligence that I've ever done. And they basically create a middleware, or rather a software, to allow machine learning to happen on quantum computers. So that's merging two of the most cutting edge things that's happening today. So what we like about them is that what we realize is that there are less than 500 quantum experts globally. This team has 3 of them, and almost everyone else spoke really highly about them. They also have partnerships with many large companies globally who are looking into quantum technologies. I can't name them here, but the one thing I can name is that we actually brought in a Japanese conglomerate, TRS, whom, if you're familiar, recently invested in Grab's fintech business, as well as the Singapore government to co-invest with us. So that's Entropica Labs, quantum startup or machine learning startup, depending on how you see it. Next is Scooterson. So they are they are self-balancing semi-autonomous electric scooters. So imagine a two-wheeler that can balance itself and can move itself. So that is what Scooterson is doing, and they are first in the world to do that. Interesting things about them, they are selling into really, really large, mostly tech companies who have their own campuses, and they have their own campuses so large that they need a mode of transportation to get their stuff around. And that is one of Scooterson's biggest markets today. Interestingly, we managed to get Asad Industry to co-invest with us, which is one of the world's most highly regarded contract manufacturer. So in times of COVID-19, where we are actually quite concerned with the supply chain and the manufacturing capacity of a lot of our hardware startups, Scooterson, fingers crossed, touch wood, is still relatively protected, both in terms of their quality and their supply chain, because of having such a big name behind them. Now, next, Meadow AI is a company that I think a lot of people in the audience would know well. I wouldn't try to say that I know them better than any of you because I'm not a medically trained professional. But effectively, for those who don't know them well yet, they are going into AI diagnostics using ultrasound devices, allowing ultrasound to see objects in 3D. So with AI companies, the tech is really about the data. We want proprietary data, quality data at volume. So what these folks have is effectively proprietary data from 10 hospitals around the world. And they have been working on this data for a number of years prior to setting up Meadow. So that is one of the key competitive differences for us. And as you can see, their notable partners include people like Albert Einstein Hospital, which is just about one of the best hospitals in the whole of Latin America, as well as the Canadian government, who is very supportive with them and giving them quite a number of grants in order to try to help them and also get them to set up a little bit of a presence in Canada. Next is Preact. Now, this is one of the few companies that we look at that are based in the USA. Now, what they do is they take missile defense technology and apply it to vehicles such that about 0.25 seconds before a crash happens, we can predict that the crash has happened. So what is good about this is then that we are now able to deploy very early stage, very active safety mechanisms, such as tilting the vehicles, cutting the seatbelts in advance, allowing slow deploy airbags. And this is, again, a rare company. They are based in USA, but we knew the founder before we invested. So in this space, the tier one, what we call tier one suppliers, which is effectively suppliers who sell to the likes of BMW, Ford. There are about 3 of them that do active safety. They take up about 80% of the market size. And today, Preact is working with 2 of them. which explains the valuation uplift since our investment. UNL is a very recent investment that we made. If you Google it, you probably can see it. They are effectively, the way I explain it simply is that they overlay a 3D grid onto existing maps that is about a few centimeters by a few centimeters by a few centimeters, so both horizontally and vertically. That effectively allows them to label, identify with very, very high accuracy any location worldwide. And this becomes then a platform for a lot of things. So for example, you can enable delivery people to know exactly how to get to a point, a very specific point, like a desk or a meeting room, and they will be fully guided even if it's indoors. You can also, for example, integrate some fintech payments into it. And the examples and the list just goes on. In COVID-19 times, they are helping a number of countries to track and trace. And there is a very big initiative going from them right now called Human Unlimited, which is supported by the likes of United Nations and Red Cross to help countries, mostly developing countries, track and trace people during this time. I mentioned Here Maps earlier. Here Maps is effectively the largest commercial mapping company in the world. And we got them to co-invest with us into UNL into UNL for this round. So that is again what I meant by bringing enterprises into startups at very early stage. Last but not least, Jumper AI. They are a social commerce platform. I don't really like the name, but so imagine today you go onto a WhatsApp chat to make a purchase, whatever that might be. And I think it's been going on for quite some time. But usually what happens is you will then need to go to somewhere else to make payment, whether it's a bank transfer or they send you a link, you go to somewhere else to do it. These guys effectively turn chat into commerce. So that is actually the most instinctive and the most intuitive way to buy things. And at the same time, what we are seeing, numbers and metrics across the world, this is the next thing. So after you have your e-commerce, social commerce, or chat commerce is the next big thing. So notable partners, you can read Unilever, Facebook, Disney, and the likes. Okay, enough about portfolio companies. Let's not talk about me as well. So this is my boss. This Aditya is our managing director. He has about 20 years of BD sales experience, always in technology companies. Two of those companies actually got acquired. So IR got acquired for about 3 billion by Infineon. Jasper Wireless doing into IoT, and SAS got acquired by Cisco about 1.4 billion. And both of the times he's in there actually packaging the companies for sale. So you could see that he is someone who specializes in packaging companies up very well for a M&A or major acquisition. He himself, before setting up Elevate, is also an angel investor. And one of the companies he invested in is Circles.life, which partially explains why we are looking into communications technologies. And he exited at the round that Sequoia came in. So that's him. A little bit about me. So this is me back when the barbers and the hairdressers are still open. If you see me now, the hair is a lot different. But yes, I started my first business when I was 15. I'm not so sure to even call that a business, looking at how startups are sophisticated today. But then thereafter, I started 2 other companies, and then I went into a government-supported VC fund, Seeds Capital, under Enterprise Singapore, where that's when the deep tech side of me really grew. I led about 20 deals in deep tech across many different spaces. I see some questions there. Do you look at AR, VR? Yeah, so I did. In fact, AR, VR was one of the key sectors that I looked at back in those days. So prior to that, I was managing about prior to that, I was starting a company. My first job was actually at GE Capital, where I managed about US $500 million portfolio across Southeast Asia. Oh, yeah. My analyst, Kendrick, so he is a doer. He's someone who built his own drone back in school. And thereafter, he obtained a degree, mostly in economics and finance. And thereafter, he actually joined Elevate straight out of school. But he is the guy who you need to be very careful about when talking about technology, because he does go in depth and he understands it from a sort of an engineer point of view, and both also a finance commercial point of view. Right, all these would not have been possible without this bunch of people, and this is just a select bunch of people that we are putting out here. They are our venture partners and advisors, and they help us with everything from due diligence to value creation. So the one name that maybe some of you will be familiar here is David Medina Tato, who is leading global BD and licensing at Sanofi. Right now, he leads everything in China for Sanofi as well. A medical doctor with some VC experience, with very, very good commercial and financial acumen. And he helps us a lot in asking the right question, asking the good questions for a lot of our medtech deals. Vidit mostly comes from mostly helps us with the mobility deals. So he's the CEO of Caro, and he's also Uber's first employee in APAC. Virginia is at Facebook, but you can also see that she's at a number of places like PayPal, eBay, and she is a very, very good product person to talk to, especially talking about AI and software. Mark helps us with the fund management, but I will skip that a little bit because I think for the audience it's a bit less relevant. Okay, so to quickly end up, in summary, we are a global fund with a global mandate. We have Southeast Asia focus. We look at B2B future tech in these 4 sector areas. And the seed is pre-seed and above at US 250K and above. So with that, I see a number of questions coming out, and I'll very quickly jump into some of these questions. It's Q&A time. Okay, first one with 9 votes. I'll probably answer the first 2 with 9 votes. So first question from Haihan: in the post-COVID reality, how do you view the VC world in terms of risk, appetite, and opportunities? Oh, great question. In fact, we get asked that a lot in recent times. Many people are very interested in this topic. And we have even attended roundtables by some of the ecosystem developers, ecosystem players, trying to talk about this topic, whether jobs are being protected, whether startups are still growing, whether VCs are still investing. So yes, again, great question. Now, I'll answer it from 2 prongs. One is Elevate, 2 is what we are seeing in the market today. Now, for Elevate, our key focus in COVID-19, and that for better or worse, right, is to protect our own portfolio companies. So that is really, again, ingrained into our value creation DNA, which is also why the team has been extremely busy in the last few months. But yet, at the same time, the number of deals that we managed to churn through is, relatively speaking, for us, not that high. And that is something that we unfortunately have to make a very strategic decision about, is about our portfolio companies first, and then new deals are unfortunately a second priority. So that is us. Not to say that we are not doing new deals, or that we are stopping in terms of fund deployment, or that our risk appetite has fundamentally changed. We actually don't think so. In fact, if we are talking about risk appetite, or we are talking about opportunities, VCs who has been through up and down cycles in the economy know that the best fund vintages are the ones that starts around economic recession, because that's when the best opportunities come up. And that's when, actually, if any startup manages to survive the economic recession, then effectively it's like standing on an escalator. Whether you are standing still or you are running hard, you still move up. So that is how we see COVID-19 impacting both ourselves from an operational perspective, as well as our new investments perspective. And effectively, no change to our risk appetite, no change to our risk profile. We are still looking at a lot of companies. Now, but if I zoom out a little bit into the global context, now this still applies to global context. We see a lot of VC funds also zooming out and focusing themselves on portfolio protection or value creation, or adding value to their portfolio companies. A number of them have actually said, and these are typically the larger VC funds, because I think they are a lot more impacted by the economic numbers, have pretty much taken a pause due to the uncertainty, which is completely reasonable given that even the large investment banks, a lot of times during this time, they have taken a pause. That's when risk profile, risk appetite might have changed a little bit. I don't know for sure. But my best guess is yes, if you are looking at the larger ones, chances are it's not going to be so easy. And chances are that your financial forecast will be given a very, very massive haircut, at least for the next 12 months, if not 24 months. And talking about timeline, just a final point that we want to add is that our general advice for any startups in this space, 24 months runway. And that is elev8's advice. Reason being, we don't really know how long this will last. A typical economic recession might not last that long, but this is a COVID-19 catalyzed economic recession. So with both of these things going on, we don't know. We have decided to take a conservative approach at 24 months. Okay. Hi Han, if you're there, I hope this answers your question. If not, maybe reach out to me or post a follow-up question below. But if not, I will put that as answered. Okay. Kevin. So this question is asked by Kevin. What is your typical fund life? Will all investee companies fall under the same fund, bearing in mind that medtech grow at much different rates compared to the other verticals? No, great question. So we have a typical fund life, which is so a typical VC fund life is 10 years, usually 5 plus 5, which is effectively 5 years to do all your investments and then 5 years to divest the companies. And usually there is also a customary extension for 2 years, just in case that you can't divest all the companies within this 12-year period. Or for that matter, 7 years after the last investment. Now, will all investee companies fall under the same fund? So currently we are working on one fund. So yes, in future, if we raise future funds, that is up for anyone to see. We have not spoken very in-depth or discussed very in-depth about how that could work or should work. And we have an army of people trying to advise us on how this thing should be done. So I will not go too in-depth into that. And I get the question about how do we then bear in mind that medtech companies grow at very different rates as compared to other verticals. And that is actually why the inflection point is critically important to us. And that is also why I think medtech companies, medtech founders is very critically important for you to understand that VCs, again, need to keep our lights on. That is the landscape. We have our own investors to, of course, explain to, and typically that is the fund life. Now, if you are in a medical startup that takes 20, 30 years to commercialize and reach a state where exit is possible, then you want to look into maybe corporate VCs or maybe family offices, less so venture capitals. So that is when fund life becomes slightly less important. But do note that just about every investor is ROI focused, and the longer you take to exit, this becomes financial math, right? The ROI starts to decrease, the IRR starts to decrease. So do I answer the question? Will all investing companies fall under the same fund? So yes, so right now they will all fall under the same fund, and it helps that we are a very young fund. We actually started late 2018. So I don't see, as of the next 2 or 3 years, any companies that we invest in not being able to exit from, at least from fund one. I don't have a massive issue with any of our portfolio companies. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kelvin. Okay, and Chris had a question with 8 votes. How large a stake in a startup are you typically looking for? Do you lead rounds with other investors? So I'll answer the second question first because it's easy. Yes, we do lead rounds. In fact, for our co-investment with the Singapore government, we have to be the lead investor. So yes, but having said that, we only lead rounds for the 4 key sectors that I mentioned we focus in. So maybe just let me pull that up again. Just to quickly refresh everyone's mind, these are the four key sectors that we look at, and we will only lead rounds in these four key sectors. How large of a stake in a startup are you typically looking for? To be very honest, it is not something that's cast in stone, and a lot of it depends on the unique circumstances surrounding the startup, the valuation, the existing board, whether we are leading the round, many other factors. I would say typically if we are leading a round, we will usually look for a sufficient amount that allows us to have a board seat. For a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, we need to be able to evaluate the company. And if we lead the round, we want to have a board seat in order to make sure that we are very much on top of things. And also being able to see the company, not just from an investor perspective, but also from an insider perspective, that really helps us value at some of these portfolio companies. So I would say a lead investor will typically not look for anything less than 3%. In fact, I will put it at 5% to be conservative. And this applies to every investor, not just us. Reason being, if you have a investor with 1% shareholding, it will be a lot more difficult to explain to other investors why this person is taking a board seat, why this person has got certain special rights, or even observer seat, which is something that we have come across before. So typically there will be a set threshold, usually about 3 to 5% for board seat. For observer seats, it might be a 2%, 3% threshold. So, yeah, I believe that helps answer the question. Okay, let's okay. I'm supposed to end at 2, so I have 3 minutes. So let's hope to answer 2 or 3 questions in the meantime. Massimo, thank you for your question. Can you explain what you include under medtech? Would you consider investing in a startup that develops tools for life sciences? So I believe this slide explains a little bit. We have 3 examples here. So we look at AI-powered radiology, which is really Meadow. Drug discovery platforms. So yeah, I believe that's what you mean, startup that develops tools for life sciences. And that's similar. So yes, I suppose, yes, we do, to your second question. And AI diagnostics, yes, we do that as well. Effectively, we don't really need, I mean, these are always questions that are difficult to answer. And the example that the analogy I give is that, just because someone is in the market trying to buy a house, doesn't mean that an agent coming saying that, hey, I have a 5-room flat in Toa Payoh, are you interested? I can answer that question, because as with every startup, we look at a lot of things, and these, referring back to the slides, are some of the things that we look at. A startup that develops tools for life science, really, I can only say is within our mandate, and we look at it, but we still have to evaluate it from a lot of different factors. Okay, Kevin, do you typically take the role of lead investor, or do you tag along with specialist medtech investors? So I believe I've answered this question. Yes, we take a lead investor. We take the role of a lead investor. Do we tag along with specialist medtech investors? Well, we can. We have no issues with following, especially if someone is a specialist medtech investor. We might also bring on board a couple of corporate enterprises that we think are of strategic value to the startups that we are investing in. Okay, Abhijit's question: what is your advice to PhD researchers who are willing to translate promising technology developed during the PhD research into a commercial product? Okay, this is a fantastic question. And Abhijit, the number one problem I see with PhD researchers and academics trying to spin off any companies or trying to come out and start their own companies is this: they tend to assume that technology sells itself. So that is usually a key concern for me personally, having done quite a number of deep tech medtech deals, that technology doesn't sell itself. And if a founder has got that mindset, the mentality that if I just make my technology better than my competitors, it will sell, most of the time that means very slow commercial traction, because they forget that business development, sales and marketing is a very major part of any startup. So I would say, do you if I would, so the most successful way that I see happening, of course, there are many ways. The most successful one that I see is to pair up with a business development guy, or a guy who branches or is a bridge between whatever is the PhD research you're talking about, that's the technology arm of it, and the other part, which is the business development part of it. So this guy will be talking to your advisors, talking to your investors, talking to your customers, while you as one of the technical co-founder can focus on the technology. Yep. Okay, it's 1:51. I'll probably cut off here. Just let me do a quick scroll down to see whether there are any really, really important questions that I think I should address. Okay, I think that's about it. I probably wouldn't go too in depth into any of the remaining questions. But if you really, really have a burning questions, do reach out to Furnace and the Catalyst team. Let them know that you absolutely need Remy to answer this question, and they will then forward that to me, and hopefully we can have a follow up chat from there. If there's nothing else, Furnace, back over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Remy, and thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. We hope you enjoy it. So, if you, of course, have any more burning questions for Remy, or even like to engage in a one-to-one conversation with him, we have a startup clinic that is set to launch next Tuesday, 5th May at 1 p.m. So, this startup clinic session is exclusively for Catalyst members only. And as a founder of the startup, this is a really good open opportunity for you to have the real conversation with Remy and also pitch your brilliant idea to him. So if you are interested, please register your interest with us. Then thank you once again for attending the webinar. We'll be sharing with you the slides as well as a recording of the video via email. So do keep a lookout for it in the inbox. Okay, so if you like, also stay connected with us on LinkedIn for our upcoming events. Give us a follow there. Or if you have any questions, please feel free to visit our website. Drop us an email at hello@thecatalyst.sg. So once again, thank you for joining us at this session. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll keep a lookout in your inbox. Thank you. Bye.